quickly. And that, of course, is important for you all to know we're recording the meeting. And I hope it'll be a productive meeting for you. IUPUI, we're Indiana University, Purdue University in our state capital, Indianapolis. And we've been a CERTL partner or member since 2015. And I'm delighted to say many of the folks that helped us start with CERTL are still with us today and are helping to pull together this series of workshops, along with some really outstanding collaborators and experts from our campus. We've shared a lot of prior programs on some of our expertise in Indianapolis, certainly related to diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as some programs on community engaged scholarship and service learning. And hopefully you're interested in those areas and have benefited from some of those workshops. Our campus has been engaged in high impact practices, the topic for today, for many years. And we really want to promote undergraduate student learning and success. And that's why these practices have become so integrated in all of our schools. There's today's workshop as well as follow-ups on October 12th, October 19th, and November 2nd that I hope you'll join us for. And we actually have an Institute for Engaged Learning, and our director for that institute is here today. I'll introduce him in a second. But the institute is really a hub for staff and faculty, as well as graduate students that want to engage in teaching, to think about these high impact practices, to help develop new practices, and to implement them across our campus. And we're really proud and delighted about the effectiveness of those in both retention, as well as helping us attract some incredibly innovative and distinct students to coming to IUPUI. So with that, I'm pleased to quickly introduce Dr. Jerry Dadday, who is a professor of sociology and the executive associate dean of our Institute for Engaged Learning. Jerry's worked closely with our associate vice chancellor for undergraduate education, the institute staff, and he's brought some today, and as well as many other units and collaborators. And you'll hear from some in those other groups in the future webinars that we offer on this topic. Students benefit in the Institute from scaffolded engaged learning experiences. They start as early as the first year with first year learning experience and then move on up eventually in many programs ending with a capstone experience. So Jerry is a member of the High Impact Practices in the state's national working group and conference planning. And he leads a busy life like many of you. I'll just mention it's the fall and Jerry loves to go outdoors with his family, and he's an avid photographer, which shows us once again that there is life beyond the classroom. So I hope you all enjoy the workshop today, and take it away, Jerry.
Janice, thanks so much. Kate, thanks. And thanks for all of you for being here today to talk a little bit about high impact practices, what they are. This session's really setting up the 3 subsequent sessions that Janice and Kate referenced, where we're going to dive into some specific high impact practices, specifically global learning, undergraduate research, and an e-portfolio. So today's session's designed to sort of give you an overview of high impact practices and some of the major themes and how we go about delivering high impact practices in an effective way. For our session today, these are our learning outcomes. This is what I hope you'll be able to do at the end of the session, or the knowledge that you'll take away from this session. You'll be able to identify the characteristics and features of a high impact practice, identify the benefits of HIPS for student learning and success, and discuss the relationship between instructional alignment and high impact practices. So when I use the term HIPS, I'm referring to high impact practices. Those two would be interchangeable. And for our timeline for the session, we have an hour, so another 55 minutes, and this is a lot. I think we can get through it. I'd like to start off by doing 2 polls, and we'll do those in a second. I'd like to give an overview of what high impact practices are in their relationship to instructional alignment, which is a core concept, core idea, core practice in teaching courses. Well, we do the same thing with high impact practices as well. My colleague who's with me from the Institute for Engaged Learning, Tom Hahn, he directs our research and assessment effort in the Institute. And Tom also is the chair of our Program Review and Assessment Committee here at IUPUI. So we have a whole group of about 50, 60 folks that are focused on program assessment. Tom chairs that group. Tom's a rock star on this campus. He's going to share with you some of his work in evaluating the Sam H. Jones Scholarship Program. It's a service learning community engagement program here at IUPUI. We thought for today's session, we talk about something that wasn't tied to those 3 high impact practices that we'll talk about in the subsequent sessions. So something unique, something that frankly IUPUI is known for. If we have some time, I'd like to do some breakout rooms with all of you to have you think about a couple of questions, and then we'll come back and I'll share some resources that we have here at IUPUI in the form of our high impact practice taxonomies. So that's the sort of timeline that I have for the session. What I'd like to do first is to invite you all to participate in a poll. And I haven't started the poll yet, so don't go there just yet, but we're going to use a website called Menti, and there's a code there. And this is the first question that you're going to be asked to respond to when I open up the poll in a second. And basically what I'd like to know, based on the 90 or so participants that we have in the session right now, if you've participated in one or more of these experiences during your undergraduate education. So not necessarily as a graduate student or as a faculty member, but when you were an undergraduate student, did you participate in any of these? So I am gonna stop sharing for a second. I'm gonna come over here to Menti and I'm gonna start my presentation. And if all of you could go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and use the code 504596, and share with me if you've participated in any of those high impact practices. And what I've just shared with you are some different high impact practices. And I'll give folks a few minutes. We've got 15 participants, 18 participants. You guys are rock stars. Look at you go. Okay, a couple more minutes. Okay, we're up to 57. The number's slowing down a little bit, 58, 59 participants. So I'm going to talk a little bit while folks finish taking the poll. This doesn't surprise me at all. When I think of CERTL and its goal and mission to support STEM education, a lot of you are graduate students, likely in STEM programs. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you got your foundation in STEM through some kind of undergraduate research project at your institution, at your undergraduate institution. So the fact that 52 out of 70 of you said that undergraduate research was a high impact practice that you participated in doesn't surprise me at all. I'm willing to bet also that the 34 of you who said you did a capstone experience, that was probably tied to your undergraduate research experience at the same time. So those are the two, categories that come out on top. But we also have a lot of folks who have engaged in service learning, community-based learning, internships, and a sizable number of you, maybe a third, have done a study abroad experience when you were an undergraduate. These numbers are great. And these numbers, frankly, don't surprise me dramatically. You're all in graduate school, or many of you are new faculty. And the reality is these experiences likely played a role in providing the foundation for you to make that jump to graduate school and to pursue more education. We know based on research, these experiences are transformative in a variety of ways. Having said that, what I'd like to do in this poll, and this is just the second one, this is the last one, in one word or phrase, how would you describe the experience, the undergraduate research experience or the capstone experience that you referenced on that previous slide? In one word or in one phrase, how would you describe the experience? This is great. So some of the words that I see that are sticking out is obviously challenging, We know these experiences require a lot of time, effort, time on task. They require you to do something and to engage in your learning. So I see engaging there. I see transformative. These experiences really are exciting in the sense that they bring learning to life, and they can be life-changing. I see transformative and eye-opening, enlightening, wonderful. But I also see some ones that are not as prominent, but could be good or could be bad. I saw unguided. I'm not sure that's a good thing. It is unguided in the sense that you have to solve problems on your own, but it probably should be guided in some way with a mentor. I see the word insufficient. I underappreciated it. Wow. So one thing we know about these high impact practices is that students tell us that they love them, but it's only after they graduated, for some of them. So that they realize once they get into the workforce or start doing stuff in the civic space that they realize that it was really important for their learning and their education. So this is great. So obviously some strengths and some positives, but I also see some of you mentioned some negatives as well, and I'm hoping we can address some of that in our conversation today as well. So, all right, great. Thank you all for sharing that. That's awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and close that, and I'm going to share my screen. And back over here to this. Okay, so these are our, whoops, go over here. These are the American Association of, the Association of American College and Universities. These are the 11 high impact practices. And there's 11 of them. Initially there was 10, they recently added ePortfolio as a high impact practice, but they range from first year experiences to common intellectual experiences. These would be things like general education, learning communities, collaborative projects and assignments. On the previous slide or in the Menti poll, I had undergraduate research, diversity and global learning, service learning and community-based learning, internships, as well as capstone. So these sort of classify as the 11 Association of American College and Universities high impact practices. And we'll talk a little bit about what these things do and how they benefit students. The ones on the left-hand side of your slide, these are things that we would typically see early on in the curriculum. Some of this stuff could happen later in the curriculum as well, but foundational, first-year experiences, first-year seminars, common intellectual experiences like general education and even learning communities, we tend to see that first year, second year. The practices that you see on the right-hand part of the slide, we typically see in a student's pathway, their sophomore, junior year, as well as in their senior year, especially that capstone experience. So the left-hand side, typically early, right-hand side, typically middle or later in the curriculum. Now, the field of high impact practices, a lot of these HIPs have been around for decades. Learning communities have been around for decades. Undergraduate research, same thing, service learning. But the concept of a high impact practice was really formalized in 2008 with George Koo's famous publication. It's part of AAC&U called High Impact Educational Practices. And what he does in that volume is articulate some of these high impact practices, what they are, and some of the research that he collected on these high impact practices through the National Survey of Student Engagement. This is a large survey that's conducted nationally looking at these practices. And what he found through that research is that the effects of participating in these high impact practices are positive for all types of students. So all students benefit from participating in these HIPs. And that's a good thing. What he also found is that historically underserved students tend to benefit more from engaging in these educationally purposeful activities than majority students. So what does that mean? Black students, Latinx students, first generation college students, when they participate in these experiences, they tend to benefit more, see better engagement scores, better learning scores, better graduation scores, better overall student success scores. So that's a positive as well. These practices are helping us grapple with some of the equity questions that we have and some of the equity issues that we have in higher education. We know that good students seek out these experiences, but what we also know is that students who are traditionally underserved benefit. And so this is another positive. But this is what was sort of earth-shattering in terms of, and a call to action for institutions of higher education. Those same underserved groups who benefit from these practices are also the ones who are least likely to participate in them, that they're least likely to engage in them. And so this calls to question, you know, how do we get more students involved in these high impact practices, especially those who stand to benefit the most, but they're least likely to participate. We know based on research, they're less likely to participate for a whole variety of socioeconomic reasons. Many of them are working, many of them might be working 2 or 3 jobs. A lot of these high impact practices may have a cost barrier associated with them, especially things like a study abroad, or you can't do a free internship experience or a free research experience. You can't volunteer your time because of other economic and social commitments that you might have in terms of employment or family life. So we know that the students who stand to benefit the most were least likely to participate. When we look at some data across institutions of higher education, this is just one of the studies that my colleagues and I, as part of HIPS in the States, like to showcase. It's data from California State University Northridge. The Office of Institutional Research, after CU's publication, went and looked at their data, linked it to NESI data, and what they found is what CU was talking about, that when students participate in more than one HIP, we see this equalizing effect. When Latino students participate in 2 or more high impact practices, their graduation rates look more like the white students, the non-Latino students. But if they don't participate in any high impact practice, we see that inequity where the graduation rate is about 20% less. And so researchers have looked at these data and they show that these high impact practices, in addition to the learning that they provide and the engagement that they provide, there's a benefit in terms of student success measures. And presidents, deans, provosts, they like looking at data like this. And so it becomes a way for, we need to invest in these practices and find ways to get students engaged in them more. The current work in the field of HIPS is focused in 3 broad areas. And the first one deals with equity and access. How can we ensure that students have access to these high impact practices? And you could use the expression, oh, how do we ensure that all students have access to these high impact practices? My colleagues in the Institute, we like to say, how do we get students who have typically not participated in them engaged? And that's specifically Black students, Latinx students, and first generation college students. You know, in our society, the racial social justice movement right now, it's Black Lives Matter. How do we get Black students involved in these high impact practices? It's easy to say we want all students to have access to them. Who doesn't want that? But how do we get those students who traditionally haven't had access to them to participate and engage? What do we need to do to provide those opportunities? A lot of that comes down to scaling. How do we make these pervasive across the curriculum? How do we embed these in classes? And how do we fund research experiences for students through scholarship or employment? Same thing with internships. And community engaged projects. So how do we scale these so that they're pervasive everywhere? And at the same time, how do we ensure that there's fidelity, there's quality to these experiences? Because you just can't call something an internship and it is an internship. What are the features, what are the characteristics that make it a high quality educational experience? These are the benefits of high impact practices based on the research that we have today. We know that these things promote persistence and retention, increased graduation rates, higher rates of faculty, staff, and student interaction, deep learning and critical thinking, greater student engagement, and we also know that they promote greater appreciation for diversity. So these are all the benefits of high impact practices based on the research that we've done here at IUPUI and at institutions across the country. Another publication in 2013, George Koo and my colleague Ken O'Donnell at California State University, Dominguez Hills, they just took a different tact in this later publication. What they wanted to look at is what are some of the common features that exist across all of these high impact practices? So we've got 11 of them. Are there any common features that we can identify and ensure that there's some fidelity in these experiences? And what they identified are some common elements that that are embedded within each of these experiences. That's kind of small, that the text in these slides, but I'm going to show you what those 10 elements are. Last year, there was a publication in Change magazine called HIPS at 10, High Impact Practices at 10 years old. Actually, it was late 2018, early 2019. Ken O'Donnell and George Koo published this along with Carol Schneider to just basically revisit what we've learned. And what they found is that those key features of a high impact practice, are still relevant. These 8 key features, they've revisited them and said they're still valid. And these are them. These are the characteristics that make something a high impact practice. And when I looked at the word cloud that you did, and I just realized I may not have shared my screen, so you couldn't see what I was seeing, and I apologize for that. But, I heard the word, hard work. I saw the words hard work and engaging. High impact practices, you have to set expectations at a high level for them to be effective. There's a lot of work for the faculty member, for the mentor, and for the student. It requires a significant investment of time. There's a lot of meaningful and sustained interaction between faculty and the student with his or her peers. There's broad experiences with diversity. It's incumbent on the faculty member, the mentor, to provide frequent and constructive feedback. Periodic opportunities for the student to reflect on their learning, and most importantly, integrate the learning. What are they learning over time, and how is it what they're learning in this experience, how does it relate to other experiences, whether other high impact practices or other classes that they're taking in the curriculum or co-curricular experiences. Ideally, we'd want to have relevance through real world applications. So a lot of undergraduate research, you're doing research in a lab with a faculty member that has real world implications. When I think about all the research happening now around COVID-19, the reality is that's a real world application. And so that adds a level of excitement, purpose, and can actually help in the motivation towards that high impact practice, getting plugged in and engaged with it. And the last feature is a public display of competence. When a student goes and does a poster presentation and publicly displays what they learned through the experience, or does a presentation at a conference, or even just does something on their campus in terms of giving a public display of what they learned through the experience. That's an important aspect related to the integrative learning and the communication skills that they build in these experiences. So I'm not going to do a poll or a Menti for this, but I'd just like you to think about for a second, what makes a high impact practice high impact? Why do these things reveal these high impact outcomes? What makes something like an internship or a service learning experience or an undergraduate research project, what makes that high impact? How do we know these different forms of engaged learning actually have this high impact for our students on our campus? Well, based on the Menti earlier, many of you participated in these experiences. And for a long time, we've just sort of, resigned ourselves as, what? These things are high impact because we know they're high impact. Really tautological. It's just like we know it when we see it, right? That these things are high impact. The proof's in the pudding. Students who participate in them go on to graduate school. They go on to be faculty. They go out into the world and do great things in corporations and in civic organizations. So we just know they're high impact. They've been high impact for a long time, and therefore they must be high impact. Well, that circular reasoning only gets you that so far. We really need to sort of tease out why these things are high impact and what makes them so. And a lot of that ties into many of the sessions that CERTL offers. You really need to gather data and assess the impact of these experiences. We shouldn't just take it on face value that these things are high impact. You just can't offer an experience and call it a high impact practice. You could offer an experience like an internship experience, and it could be awful, and the student doesn't get anything out of the experience. Same thing with an undergraduate research project. So there has to be fidelity and quality associated with the experience. And one of the resources I'll share with you at the end of this presentation is our IUPUI high impact practice taxonomies. These are things that we use for professional development with faculty to try and improve the craft and the delivery of high impact practices so that so we can maximize the learning and the experience for our students. So you just can't offer an experience. You have to have some intentionality behind it and make sure you're offering it with a level of quality. Every experience should also have some student learning outcomes associated with it. What do you want students to get out of the experience? What do you want them to learn from the experience? And these things have to be assessed. Students are going to participate in a variety of forms of engaged learning. Let's call these activities. Students need to reflect on their learning, what in terms of their application, in terms of the integration of the learning. And that could be done through an e-portfolio, but it also could be done just through some reflection and an assignment. And then we need to assess the learning that takes place, actually assess the reflective artifact, or reflect the poster or assess the poster presentation, or the presentation that the student gave as a product of that high impact practice. So we need to make sure that we're doing the assessment using a rubric of some kind. And then lastly, we should work with our offices of institutional research on our campuses to try and measure, to try and capture what impact these high impact practices have on measures of student success, like retention and graduation rates. Why is that last step important for people like us as educators? These high impact practices are time intensive, they're labor intensive, and many of them cost money. If we want chancellors and presidents and deans and provosts to allocate money to us so that we can deliver these high impact practices to students, we need to show that they're benefiting students, not just in their learning, but in terms of student success measures as well, in terms of retention and graduation rates. That helps make the case for more funding to do more of this with students. So we need to do all of this to ensure that these things are high impact. One of the things that we talk a lot about in instructional design is this idea of instructional alignment, that you need to have learning outcomes aligned to activities, aligned to assessment. And that's basically what I shared on the previous slide. Instructional alignment applies to high impact practices as well. You need to have the outcome, you need to have the activity, and you need to assess it. As an example of this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom Hahn, who's going to talk a little bit about how we do this with the Sam Jones Scholarship Program. Tom, you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Tom Hahn. I'm Director of Research and Assessment here at the Institute for Engaged Learning. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the Sam H. Jones Community Service Scholarship Program. And real quickly about Sam Jones, he was a great man here in the city of Indianapolis. He was the president of the Indianapolis Urban League for 40 years and did so much to promote equality among the races and equality across gender. The Sam Jones Scholarship Program has been around here since 1994. And IUPUI is really fortunate, one of the few campuses in the country where these are internally designated funds for students to receive to do community-based learning. And we have 6 scholarship programs currently: Alternative Breaks, Bonner Scholars, Family Schools and Neighborhood Scholars, Service Learning Assistants, Paul's Pantry, and Fugate. I'll tell you a little bit about each one really quickly. Fugate students actually tutor at the local high school and elementary school. Paul's Pantry and Closet, those scholars work with the campus pantry and the campus closet. Service Learning Assistants, this is a unique one. They work with an instructor to help develop a service learning course or conduct research in the community. Bonner Scholars work with a community organization to help them provide their service. And Alternative Break Scholars work with to plan and implement alternative break trips. And again, it's a substantial amount that the university allots for this program. We have 150 students per year to participate in these civic engagement activities. Next slide, Jerry. Here's some of the learning outcomes associated with the programs. And we assess them in a variety of ways. At the end of the year, we have a long survey, a self-report survey that students complete to get a measure of their civic mindedness, their professionalism, civic communication skills. And it also has a series of open-ended questions that they respond to. But we also do direct learning through, we have students do reflective artifacts that we then assess with a variety of rubrics. And also some of the programs also have digital stories that the students will put together. That's pretty labor intensive for the students, but we found those to be really impactful in helping them be able to talk about what they've done and then putting in the work to develop the artifact. Next slide. Here's just an example of some of the reflection prompts. These are ones for a couple of our programs, and we let the program director edit these each year based on what type of experiences they're doing. And basically it's just talking how they community partner contribute to the outcomes, how do they participate in that, and then talking more about the experience. So again, we will look at these every year and just make edits when necessary. Next slide, Jared. These are a couple of rubrics that I thought I'd just give you links to. The Civic Minded Graduate Rubric 2.0 me and some colleagues, we revised that a few years ago. We were doing an assessment of digital stories, and we had the original CMG rubric that had been developed a few years prior, but we were actually finding aspects of civic mindedness that weren't actually captured in the rubric that we were using at the time. So we revamped it. So now this is a pretty big rubric. It has 6 domains, and capacity to be a civic agent, orientation towards social change, understanding how social issues are addressed in society, working with others, sense of civic identity, valuing one's role as a social trustee of knowledge. And what that last one means is basically, how are you using your college education to benefit the community? So what many of the programs we have, they don't have to use all of these rows, but they'll pick a couple based on specific learning outcomes. The other rubric link I have up here is for the AAC and U value rubrics. Last year, we did an assessment project where we gathered all written reflections across all the programs in IEL, and we used 3 rows of the AAC and U written communication value rubric just to get a, it was a pilot study just to get a look at where the students were and have baseline data. This year, we're going to do that again. We're going to use 2 rows of the written communication value rubric, and we're going to also add the AAC and U integrative learning rubric, so we can see how they're integrating across the programs they're learning. Next slide, Jerry. Really quick, I'll do this really quick. This is a study we did a few years ago, but a little background first. The Sam Jones Scholars have really exceptional outcomes in terms of retention, usually 96 to 98% retention rate. GPA is usually 3.4 to 3.5, and this is across all ethnicities. And I presented these results one time, and a question from the audience was, these students are self-selecting into the program, they're already good students. Do you have an answer for that? And at the time I didn't. So I worked with a colleague in institutional research and decision support to do a propensity score matching study. And not to get too into the weeds statistically, but basically what that is you have the students in your program, and you have attributes of the students, such as gender, did they receive a Pell Grant, all these various attributes that are across your students. And you find another student who is not participating in your program, but has those same attributes, and then you compare results. This is all anonymous, so they have confidentiality. And so what we found after we did the matching across, and I'll just read them to you really quick. We matched participants based on gender, whether they received a Pell Award, unmet need amounts, whether they were direct admit, whether they were an unrepresented ethnicity, first generation status, living in campus housing, major, their class, and then we compared them. Really nice finding. We found that retention was 8.8% higher for students in the Sam Jones program, as opposed to like students that were not in the program. And then the retention rate was 7.9% percentage points higher for students admitted to any IU program. So it was a really nice result that really get at the influence of the program on retention. Next slide here. This shows you across ethnicities, really big impact participating in the program for African American students. 100% retention as opposed to 67%. The only one's a little lower was Hispanic, Latino, and I think that's more of a lower end that we had for those students. So again, as you can see, these are really nice results. And one other point we'd found a few years earlier, as I mentioned, Pell need, I thought of it. Our SAM scholars who receive Pell Grants actually have their academic outcomes are actually as high as those students who do not. So that's something we found. It's consistent across the years, and that's another really nice finding. Next slide, Jerry. Okay, I went through it really quick. I'm happy to take any questions at the end. Thanks.
Tom, thanks so much for that. And the data, that propensity score matching, that's the way the field's moving right now for the reasons Tom mentioned, because it gives you that control group. It helps weed out the effects of selection bias. So if any of you are stats background, research background, social science background, if you brush up on propensity score matching, it is the statistical technique that a lot of us are using to make the case to administration, to leaders on campus that these programs are important, and here's the data to back it up. What we like to do now is break you out into breakout rooms of maybe 4 or 5.
Jerry?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We do have one question on the
Sure.
chat from Marcy. If you're providing an external internship / research experience, what resources are available to structure the experience if you are not affiliated with an academic institute? Is that a quick question that you or Tom can answer at this time?
Yeah, so if you're doing an internship experience that's affiliated with a university, with an institute on a campus, there's going to be university policies that dictate how that internship has to sort of proceed. If it's an off-campus internship that is not affiliated with a campus, then it's almost like employment law would dictate, because that intern is an employee then, or a quasi-employee of the place that he or she is doing the internship. But I would argue that there's still best practices that we do in terms of, in higher ed, of facilitating an internship experience on campus that could be applied to an off-campus internship. And so I'll show some of the taxonomies at the end that you could use to think about structuring an internship experience.
And we have one more question that just came up. Are there ways to use HIPS in a single class over the duration of a semester? Or are HIPS more about spanning the entire college experience?
That's a great question. So I would argue that a lot of the HIPS are semester year based. And so it could be a course-based experience, a co-curricular experience, or something that exists in the community that you do. The reality is, like, some of the ones that last for a semester or a year could be an undergraduate research experience. It could be a capstone course that you take. It could be obviously a study abroad, would typically run the summer or a spring break. A lot of these are time bound by a semester or an academic year. The one that would cross the whole curriculum is an e-portfolio. That's the one where you could start in your first year experience and go right through your capstone. And so our 4th session as part of this webinar series, the CERTLCast series, we're going to talk about an e-portfolio that you could use in a course, in an experience, or scaffold it out across an entire 4-year degree. Any other questions, Anusha, or those are the big ones?
Those were the only ones on chat.
So we have some time. I thought maybe for the next 10, 15 minutes, we could break you out into breakout rooms of 4 or 5. I'm gonna ask for Kate's help with this. But I'd like you to focus on 3 questions. And really the first 2 are the most important here. We're not gonna have time to get through all 3 of them. But what I'd like to do is break you up into breakout rooms and have some time to at least talk about the first 2. What's one high impact practice you might like to offer at some time, either as a graduate student or when you get your first faculty job, as part of a curricular or co-curricular experience? What's one that's really appealing for you? And then what is the learning goal or outcome for that experience? Why are you having students do it? You know, you don't just have them do undergraduate research for the sake of undergraduate research. Why is it that you want them to do undergraduate research? And what do you hope they'll achieve through the experience? And then while you're thinking about it, maybe on your own, maybe after the breakouts are over, can you write down right now one learning outcome that you'd want your students to have in that experience? So it's 12:08 Eastern right now. Why don't we run these breakout rooms till 12:22, 12:23? Give us 7 minutes for question and answer and to wrap up at the end. Kate, do you mind sending folks to breakout rooms? And then we'll bring you back when it's over.
All right, so I will move people to breakout rooms. Everyone who's in the room as a co-host, you will also be included in this distribution, but you can just decline to move so that you can go or not, depending on what you're in the mood for. And if folks have trouble in breakouts, or if you don't get moved, just let me know in the chat window. So I'm gonna go ahead and move people, and once it's time to close rooms, you'll all get a minute warning before the rooms actually close and force you back into the main room. So you are on your way now.
So are there any questions before we get to the last bit on taxonomies? One question that I got just a minute ago that I think is a really good one is, what if you're doing some kind of experience, some kind of engaged learning experience, and it doesn't fall within one of those 11 AAC&U high impact practices? That's great. You know, there's a lot of things that are out there in higher ed that look like high impact practices to us, but maybe AAC&U hasn't blessed them yet as a high impact practice. I think a lot of student affairs programming, a lot of mentoring programming, supplemental instruction on college campuses that have all the features of a high impact practice. So what I would encourage you all to do is look at the 8 characteristics of a high impact practice. Things like expectations of students are set at a high level. There's opportunities for reflection. There's meaningful feedback that's provided by the faculty member, staff mentor, program director. There's some kind of public display of competence, experiences with diversity. That Koo O'Donnell publication from 2013, the features, the common features of a high impact practice, I'd look at those and see, does this experience have these? Then it looks like a high impact practice. Any other questions I can answer for folks? Tom or I?
We have one more on the chat, Jerry, from Jolene. How does the implementation or effectiveness change when the HIP is tied to grades?
Yeah, so a lot of times a HIP could be tied to part of a grade in a class. So it might be 20% of a grade or 30% of a grade or even more. And so then students, they're going to get graded on whether or not they did the experience. For something like Sam H. Jones, there's a scholarship attached to it. So in some of these high impact practices, that's the stick, if you will, that if the student didn't do it, there's a repercussion for not participating. Yes, Wayne, I'll get to those taxonomies in a second. There are taxonomies that we have that we can share with you to think about how you develop these high impact practices.
I have a question.
Sure.
Jerry. Thanks so much for this first. My question is, how do you determine first a right HIP experience for the students? How do you identify that this is the right experience for a particular student? And you try to guide him or her through that.
Great question. Tom, do you have any, before I answer, do you have any suggestions? No, I'll take it. Okay. First off, I think it should be something that you're passionate about first. So it should be something that you want to do, you're willing to commit the time to it, you have a passion for undergraduate research or civic engagement, because if you're not passionate about it, the students are going to see right through it. So first off, I'd sort of do an internal sort of evaluation, reflection on what you are passionate about and what you want to do and what you're willing to commit in terms of mentoring. I think some high impact experiences fit well in some majors versus others, or some degree programs than others. So it's thinking about your own discipline and the context of your institution, and then what you might want to deliver in terms of that experience. On our campus, what we see is faculty do not do, there's a few, but typically they're really deep in one high impact practice. They're not playing around in 3 or 4 different ones.
So in other words, you should take the initiative rather than the students will come up with a plan for a HIP experience and then share it and discuss it with you.
That if a student comes to you with an idea for a HIP, that's an opportunity for you to sort of pilot it in your own mind and see, how is this going to work, and maybe pilot it with the student to see if this is something that you'd want to do in the future. But typically it would be, you thinking about, what I'm passionate about, civic engagement, community engagement. I want to create this experience and offer it to students. And this is something that I think would fit well in the curriculum of my department.
All right, now just second what Jerry said about what you're passionate about. Oftentimes, instructors that come here wanting some training on implementing a service learning course, they're already doing something, and we help them refine it and make it more impactful for students.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. Can I answer any other questions? We got about 5 minutes left before I share some of these taxonomies with you. While folks are thinking of questions, why don't I do that? So you could take a look at the PowerPoint presentation that we've shared with you. There's examples of taxonomies in the PowerPoint itself, but in the link to the Institute for Engaged Learning is in the PowerPoint as well. This is where Tom and I work. But on our Institute website, we have these engaged learning taxonomies, or high impact taxonomies. And what we have are many taxonomies. We have taxonomies for many of the high impact practices. So you see here, we have one for capstones, e-portfolios, internships, peer mentoring, service learning, study abroad. We offer a summer bridge program. So we consider that a high impact experience. So we created a taxonomy for that. We've got one for our learning communities, and we've got one for our course-based undergraduate research experiences. So when we talk about, and in the third webinar of the series, undergraduate research, I'll share specifically this taxonomy with you. When we talk about e-portfolios, we'll share this taxonomy with you. But let me share the capstone one very briefly. What you see in these taxonomies, I'm gonna have to stop sharing and then open up the file that was just downloaded. Is this still showing in my web browser? Can you all see the taxonomy? Tom, can you nod if you see it? Yeah. So this is our capstone high impact practice taxonomy. And basically what we do in the taxonomy, they all look similar to this, is we define what a capstone experience is and why we do them at IUPUI. And then provide some definitions to get everyone on the same page of what we're talking about in the taxonomy. These are our institutional learning outcomes for undergraduate students. So this might not apply to the work that you're doing on your campus, but when we want all students when they graduate to be able to communicate, problem solve, innovate, and be community contributors. This is the part that I think would be most helpful to all of you. This is the actual taxonomy itself, where we list dimensions or attributes of what makes what is involved in a capstone experience. And then we offer a description of what a high impact experience would look like for that dimension. But we also offer what a higher impact experience would look like, and then what would the highest impact experience look like. And as you can see here, we've got multiple dimensions or attributes for what represents a capstone experience. It goes on for a couple of pages. And for all of them, a capstone community of practice made up of faculty and staff on our campus spent a year building this. They articulate what would a high impact experience look like. At the minimum level, what would be a high impact capstone experience for each of these dimensions? And then if you're willing to do things a little bit more intentionally, a little bit more effort, what would a higher impact experience look like? And then lastly, what does the highest impact experience look like? And so what we use this is we use this for as a professional development tool for folks to reflect on where are they right now in their delivery of a high impact practice, or what they might do in the implementation and delivery of a high impact practice. And then over time, over the course of their career or 3 or 5 years, how can they do some small things intentionally to tweak the experience to make it a higher impact or the highest impact possible? And so we use these as a professional development tool. We invite faculty, staff, and program directors to reflect on where they are, and then how can they move to a higher level of intentionality. So when we talk about undergraduate research in session 3, and when we talk about ePortfolio in session 4, we'll actually use the 2 taxonomies. We have a study abroad taxonomy that we'll likely talk about a little bit next week when we do global learning. But the global learning stuff is really going to focus on classroom-based global learning experiences, which can be easily implemented into a curriculum. And we're working on a taxonomy for that right now. So we just don't have one to share yet. So I hope these are helpful to you. And we have them all on the Institute for Engaged Learning's website. And there's the URL in the PowerPoint presentation where you can go look at these and think about what these experiences are and how you might implement them with a greater degree of fidelity and quality to the experience. We got a minute or 2 left. Is there any other questions that Tom or I can answer?
2 questions have come up on the chat, Jerry and Tom. The first one was, how can we frame diversity-related HIPs as beneficial to non-minoritized students while being careful not to exploit minoritized students for their diverse identities?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer in a few minutes. I think the key, one way to get at that is to have diversity actually in your experiences. So to have diverse student populations and diverse faculty and mentors participating in the experience as well. Students have to see faculty and mentors that look like them. And so I think having just diversity in the experience itself is an important step forward in that. It's a good question. It's a hard question.
And the next question from Carol, as a Latinx student, I think HIPS experiences need to center in psychological pedagogy that can, for example, strengthen the academic/research identity of minority students in these experiences. In this way, this can help students overcome previously learned barriers of competency. I would like to know if psychological pedagogy will be the most right concept for this concern?
So I don't know if that's if framing it around psychology and psychological principles is the only way to do it. So in like our high impact practices, like in our first year experience, one of the things we instill is this idea of growth mindset, that things that you can change versus a fixed mindset. So you shouldn't say, I can't do math or I'm not good at math. It's how do you get better at doing math in your math courses? And so in the first year experience, we try and teach students about growth mindset. And we spend some time talking about imposter syndrome and how you get past imposter syndrome, where it's like you belong here. You were admitted to this university, you belong here. And so I think taking steps in these HIPs through mentorship to help students see past things like imposter syndrome and fixed mindset is one way to get at that, to help promote professional growth and educational growth for students who have been traditionally underserved. The key thing of all is making sure that there's typically underrepresented minority faculty who are working with these students too. And that's a real challenge, because you look at institutions of higher education, there's a lot of white males like me and Tom. Any other questions? Kate, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks everyone so much for showing up today. We really appreciate it. As we mentioned at the beginning of the hour, this is the first of 4 events in a series on engaging students with high impact practices. Each subsequent event will dig into a specific high impact practice. So if you're leaving here with questions and you want to know more, come back. Monday mornings, we'll be here. I'll be sending a very brief evaluation out to everyone who attended. I'll also put the link in the chat window. Feedback is totally anonymous and helps us refine all of the following events in our series so that they're useful to people. When I email people who attended, I'll also include a recap of all of the wonderful events that Anusha shared with us in the chat window, and a reminder to folks on where you can see the slides from today's session. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.